So, in introducing tonight's speaker, I'm faced with the age-old conundrum of introducing somebody who perhaps needs no introduction. After 45 years of worldwide birding and conservation, is there anybody who doesn't know who Victor Emanuel is? And so, I was thinking recently when I was preparing my remarks about what, how I might approach this. And so I thought to myself, well, I could simply recite Victor's bio. And if I were to do that, what I would have told you, of course, is that Victor was born and raised in Houston. He has a master's degree in government from Harvard. He's had a long and successful career in birding and conservation and has sat on the boards of a number of prestigious organizations, including the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, the National Audubon Society, and the American Bird Conservancy, and that he's received all these amazing accolades and awards, including the prestigious Arthur Allen Award from the Cornell Lab, the Roger Torrey Peterson. However, I also, though, thought it would be nice for you to know some things about Victor that perhaps would not appear in his bio and that you might like to know about. And so, for example, were you aware that Victor happens to be a fairly passionate fan of the University of Texas Longhorns football team? Hook 'em, right, Victor? Yeah, that's right. That's right. Or that Victor's favorite word in the English language is warbler? Yeah. Or if you want to make Victor light up like a firefly, just sidle up to him and ask him about Beethoven. Yeah, if you want to get in good with Victor, go ahead and talk to him about Beethoven. But when it came down to it, though, I found myself thinking about a conversation I'd had with my friend Sam Nafee a couple of years ago. And Sam, where are you? Okay. Sam is a longtime member of our board of directors, and it was actually not something that he had said, but something that he had written. And he was talking about vent and vent tours. And I found it, he said something then that I have thought about frequently in the years since then, because it's been a couple of years. And the phrase that Sam used when describing vent tours is life affirming. Sounds pretty dramatic, but life affirming. And what could that mean? Well, something that makes you glad to be alive. And none of us would be in this room tonight if we didn't share a mutual passion for birds and nature and the outdoors. We just wouldn't. And through the creation of this company and the operation of these tours and Victor's guidance in making it so, we would not be having these life-affirming events. And whether it's you as participants who are taking these trips or us as the men and women of Vent who organize and operate these trips and who guide them, we wouldn't have that. And so, I could say a little bit more about that, but that's not my story to tell. That's Victor's story to tell. But for me and my colleagues, for those of us who have made a career of bird tourism, being in nature, guiding, Victor gave us a life. We would be out doing other things and we'd have done it probably successfully or somewhat happily, perhaps. But to be able to have the kind of lives that we have had being in nature and sharing it with the wonderful people like you, we have one person to thank for that. And he's sitting right over there. And even after all these years, after 45 years, Victor is still on top, getting it done day in and day out, and still very much the boss, and very much the mannequin dancer. And with that, I'd like you to join me in welcoming Victor Emanuel.
Thank you so much, Barry. I don't really need to speak now because he's already said so much about me. But before I talk my speech, I want to, this has been, it's our 45th. This is the third time we've had an anniversary. We did 30th, 40th, and we were going to do the 50th. And people said, no, we have to have one in 5 years. We can't wait till the 50th. So we're doing the 45th. And they've all been wonderful, with wonderful speakers and wonderful birding, but this has been one of the best. And with all of them with the great groups of people, but again, this is maybe one of the best groups of people and the best birding. Who I would never have dreamed, I said that the Lower Rio Grande Valley is fabulous for birding, but that we would see, not all of us saw all these birds, we would see, some of us, a rose-footed Beckard, which is not an easy bird in the United States, a crimson-colored grosbeaks, only a few people saw it, but a flamingo, which would be a new Texas bird for me after all these years of birding Texas since I was 8 years old, and now I'm 81. But then today, a social flycatcher, which is the 4th record for the United States, a lifer for me for the United States, as for Mary Gustafson, who was there. And I want to thank Clay Taylor for calling us and telling us we've got it over here as we were running out of time. So a social flycatcher. They would have these 4 ray birds, but all the birds have been wonderful. You don't have to see rare birds to enjoy birds. A green jay, an amazing bird, a buff-bellied hummingbird. And that's one of the things I talked about the first night, appreciating every bird. But I wanted to thank, this has been so successful, some of the people that made it happen. Greg Lopez, who we've recognized before. Incredibly hard work. Tabby Garvin couldn't be here, but she was responsible for the pictures you've seen during dinner. That's all Tabby Garvin, who is one of 30 years with us, one of our most valued employees. Ben Reynolds, who set up all of the electronic stuff. So we're broadcasting it. Helped me with my PowerPoint. Eric was here earlier, Eric of our office, and Margaret, and they're not here now, but they also help people with reservations. Eric and Margaret, we want to thank them. And so those people, and then here, Karina must have been the person and ran the whole event from the standpoint, she's not here right now, we'll get her out here, but Karina, the food, the lunches, the breakfast, the dinners, all the work that she put in, the sign in front of the hotel, which I love, all these people that made this a success. And now, and I don't want to keep people up too late, I'm going to do my lecture, which I'm going to have to learn, as Ben tells me, to use the clicker. And my lecture is going to be a history event. There I am, I think, on the coast of Peru, where condors used to come down and eat sea lions on one of my first trips to Peru. And I'm going to try to keep it, I could really go on for a long time, a lot of stories, but I'll try to keep it relatively short. So I think back in my life, it's 1970. I'm working at the Urban Studies Institute at University of Houston. I'm in a room with no windows. I'm not out in nature. I don't really like what I'm supposed to be doing, and I haven't even been told exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. It's not a very interesting job. And Peter Alden, who I'd met when I was at Harvard, comes by, and we have lunch, and he's come back from a tour, and I thought, God, that'd be wonderful to be leading tours, but how could I do that? How could I get into leading tours? Then somewhat later, I remember 1970, I'm at that point pretty young, and I get a phone call from Dean Gorham. It's interesting in life how connections happen. So Dean Gorham calls me. He's from Decatur, Illinois, and he had gotten the name from the manager of the Aransas National Wildlife Refuge, who had become a friend of mine. He had called this guy, and he was head of the refuge, and said, well, who could I get to take me out birding around Houston? I'm coming for a banking convention. So my friend gives me my name, and he calls me. And at that time, I'm living in one room of a house that Sam Nafee's family have rented the house, and they let me sublet one room in the house. That's what my life was then. That's where I started. I'm living in this room, and the phone rings. I don't have my own private phone. They have a phone downstairs. Victor, you have a call from this guy named Dean Gorham. So I pick up the phone, and he says, if I paid you $100, would you take me and my wife out birding for a day when I come to Houston? And I didn't drop the phone, but I probably felt like dropping it. And we had a wonderful day. There were 5 birds they wanted to see. I won't go into a lot of detail, but we saw all of them. Sprague's pipple was one, and white-faced, I can't remember all the ibis. And we had a wonderful time together. I thought, well, maybe other people would want to do that. And maybe I could, lead local tours. So, and a lot of this is in my books. You've already read about it. But anyway, I was born in Houston. These are my parents. My mother, who loved gardening and flowers and nature, and my father, who loved to take me to the zoo. And he was particularly interested in sports. He was a sports writer and interested in history. And they both gave me that. But it's interesting to think about your parents, what your parents give you. And one thing they gave me was caring about other people, connecting with people, keeping in touch with your friends, meeting people and becoming friends with them. They lived a very simple life. They had a very low, not much income, but they had these friends. And that was it was so important to them. And of course it is to me. And I like this quote from Keats. Ask where men's glory most begins and ends, and say, my glory was I had such friends. I love that quote from Keats. And I feel that about many of you I've gotten to know and been on tour with, about our staff and leaders, that my glory was I had such friends. Well, my parents had instilled me in that, about valuing friends. And here were the mentors I got from the Outdoor Nature Club. I got in this club in Houston. It was an affiliate of the National Audubon Society. I was 10 years old. And this will relate to what I'm going to say later about camps. Everybody in the club was 30, 40, 50, 60. And here's this 10-year-old kid at the meeting. I was the only young person. And at the meeting, there's Joe Heiser, whose father had been head of the Houston Parks Board for many years, and Armand Iramatigi, and then later when I went to Austin, Edgar Kincaid. They became my mentors. One of my favorite words. It comes from Greek history, because when the Odyssey was going on and Odysseus was away from Ithaca, as he had left to go fight in the war in Troy, he had this friend. He said, take care of my son. And his name was Mentor. So later, after the Greeks, everybody read the Odyssey, you had someone that was doing it. They said, oh, you're like Mentor. You're a mentor. So it comes from, I love Greek history and the classics. Anyway, I had these wonderful mentors that took me out, and none of them had kids. I think they were glad to have a young person go out with them. And they helped me get interested in birds and conservation. So those 3 men. And one of them took me to Mexico, Armand Iramatigi, and we saw the blue-crowned motmot as I was lost in the woods, but I found my way back, fortunately. That's all in my book. And we also saw the emerald toucanet. That was my introduction to tropical birds. Armand's parents were from Mexico, and Armand and all of these guys had this thing I value so much in all of you, this great enthusiasm for birds and nature. And Armand, his last name, Iramatigi, was in the Basque Country. What you see when you get at the top of the mountain is Iramatigi. Not wonderful, Iramatigi. His last name was the way he was. He didn't say, there's the vermilion flycatcher. He'd say, La Vermilion flycatch. That was Armand, enthusiasm. And I got some of that from him. And here I am in terms of enthusiasm. I founded the Freeport Christmas Count as suggested by my mentor, Armadier Money. He said, there's no Christmas count. It was only 1 hour area. Why don't you start when I started it? And I was doing the Christmas count, and Audubon magazine sent George Plimpton to an article on my Christmas count, and I was out birding with him. And this was as we're out birding, and I have that expression on. A friend of mine said, who saw the picture, you look like you've just seen Jesus Christ. I said, no, it was a rose-breasted grosbeak, which I had never seen before on the Freeport count. That may be about the only record. And George got a kick out of that. I wrote that. But the Freeport count, there are things you do in your life that kind of lead you along the way. So it got written up in Audubon magazine by George Plimpton, a wonderful article about sometime in the 80s or sometime. And it was the first time Audubon magazine had ever had an article about birding and a birding event. So it helped me get me known to some people around the country. And here I am, there I am on the far right when I had a little more hair and the hair was darker. And we're planning the count. We're going over what we're going to do. And here I am with George Plimpton. He's looking at birds. And so George and I became friends. And he said, I'd like for you to meet my oldest friend, Peter Matheson. Well, oldest is an interesting word because it could mean the most years. He's really, 80, 90, whatever. He met my most long-term friend. They had met in elementary school. And I had read Peter's book, which is one of his many wonderful books about Africa, The Tree Where a Man Was Born, which I highly recommend. And I thought, I saw all the books he had written. I thought, God, he's the oldest friend. He's written all these books. I better get up and meet him while he's still around. So I went to New York, and I came in the room at George Plimpton's house, and there was this young man with an attractive young woman who he ended up marrying. Well, who is that? It's Peter Matheson. He was not old. He was young, and he invited me and John Rowlett, my friend who became my partner, out to birding on Long Island, and we became very close friends. So that was the Freeport count, in a way, helped me start then. But it was just a step along the way. And here I am on the Freeport count with some of my closest friends. On the far left, there's Chuck Sexton, there's Greg Lasley, who I talked about. There's Kurt Huffman, who is one of the kids who inspired me to have the camp. There's Barry Lyon, another kid that inspired me to have the camps, and me. And then on the Christmas count, just not to drop names, but here was Bruce McCandless, the astronaut, became head of Houston Audubon and took me flying around on a private plane surveying colonies of nesting herons and egrets, and was the first man to ever fly around outside of spacecraft, to leave the spacecraft and fly around on his own. So it's people you meet through birding. And then, so the Christmas count gave me somewhat of a national reputation, and then the bird of my life, the Eskimo curlew. And my friend Ben Feltner found it on Galveston. I got to see it. A lot of other people got to see it. And I wrote an article for the Audubon magazine, which had the catchy short title, Texans, show how much I'm a Texan, Texans rediscover the nearly extinct Eskimo curlew. That was a short title for my article. But again, people heard about that, and it gave me somewhat of a national reputation. And I used that to get to meet people like Dean Amadon in New York, the American Museum of Natural History, and other people that I had seen this curlew. But again, here, the early years. So after Dean Gorham asked me to take him out birding for $100, my friend Ben Feltner had found the Eskimo curlew, and I both had the idea, we want to lead people around birding. So we shared the cost. The ad was probably $300 of an ad in Birding Magazine of the ABA. And we shared the cost, but we weren't partners. We had our names. The idea some people might call me, some people might call Ben, and then we could take them out birding. So that was starting in 1970. And for about 5 years, a few people called me, a few people called Ben. And what's interesting, when you start something, you don't know what to charge. I charged, I think, $19 a day and 25 cents a mile using my car, about what a rental car would cost someone. So I was valuing myself at zero, because they would have spent the same amount for a rental car. But anyway, there was our first ad. And then after that ad, it's interesting about ideas you have that flop when you're starting something. So I had become friends with the mayor of Houston because his father was a good friend of my father. And they were having a mayor's conference in Houston. And I thought, great, I'll have a little pamphlet. And the mayor people come to the conference and they might want to go out and see some nature and birds. It's just wonderful around Houston. So the people running the mayor's conference, they agreed to put it in the packet of all the women who were coming. Any women might be interested in that. So I had an answering service and I was going somewhere. I said, I want to prepare you. You may be getting a lot of phone calls from people that want to sign up for these trips. And I was very optimistic. I come back. You have any phone calls? No, zero. Zero phone calls. None of them wanted to go out birding. They wanted to go shopping or go meet other friends or hang out around Houston. They did not want to go out in nature. There was our first little brochure that I produced. And it reminds me, I'll just tell you a little story about flops, someone that begins a career. Peter Matheson, and I heard him say this on a radio show. He was in Paris and he had a wonderful agent in New York to help him with his writing career. And he wrote a story, the beginnings of the story, and he sent it to this lady, and she was very renowned, but very tough. And she wrote Peter jokingly said, I hung around the post office waiting for the movie offers and the checks and the success I was going to have with this story. So this woman writes him back and says, Dear Mr. Matheson, John Fenimore Cooper wrote the same story 100 years ago, much better than your story. That was the beginning of his writing career. And then he and his friend heard that you could write a little Christmas story for the London paper. And if yours was picked, you got £100. And his got picked. So he sent the story and a part of that to this lady. And she wrote him back and said, well, thank you for the £10, whatever it was. But I'm glad they liked it over there because we would not want it over here. So that was the beginning of his writing career, but he persisted, and I persisted after this flop at the mayor's conference. And then at about the same time, and again, it's interesting, connections, a woman from my birding and Audubon study had moved to New Orleans, and she had met this man who was in charge of organizing pre- and post-convention trips for the National Audubon Society convention in New Orleans. So he called me, Wiley Wilkinson, and said, you know, when you get to married, there's some things you can remember, some things you can't. Wiley Wilkinson. And Wiley called me and said, we're going to do a field trip to the Galveston area. Would you be a local leader for a day? Well, one thing I do have an advantage of in helping me start, I think, big. So I said, Wiley, I'd be very happy to do that. But I think what you should do is take people to Yucatan because it's a short flight from New Orleans and you can see Mayan ruins, you can see birds, and there is a Mayan ruin. And many people said, no, we're not doing that because we don't want to go to Mexico. People will get sick or whatever. He and his wife had been. He said, that's a great idea. Organize it. So those are my first groups. Yucatan for the National Audubon Society Convention. They both filled up. We had wonderful trips. And that made me think, well, maybe what you should do is found a company, Victor Emanuel Nature Tours. And John Rowlett and I were partners. He was one of my best friends. And we listed a number of tours we were going to offer. 75 was that convention. This was a few years later. And the first trip we offered was with Peter Matheson, who I'd met through George Plimpton, the entire Texas coast, starting in Beaumont and going all the way down to the valley. And we started in Beaumont and we went out with Geraldine Watson, who was one of the top botanists in the Big Thicket, was fighting to save the Big Thicket, despite the fact that her neighbors and her family did not want that to happen because the federal government come in, buy land, it's our land, we don't want them in here. But she took us out seeing botany, and at the same time, we were looking at, and this is just a description of the tour, for the sparrow there that's so special there, the Bachman sparrow, which is one of the 8 or 10 birds that are only found in the United States, nowhere else in the world, and has a wonderful song, and there's one singing. So that was the beginning of the Matheson tour, and there we are. This is a picture of me and Peter Matheson and George Plimpton later on some other trip. But here's a nice testimonial about that Matheson trip. You can read up there. I feel I have a new dimension in my life. I'm ever thankful thankful to enjoy. I carry my binocs at all times. I always tell people bring them to breakfast when we're any place you might see something from breakfast at all times, and have ordered a hand lens to view wildflowers and plants. Well, that was the beginning of our tours, and that was nice to get that kind of note. And I've gotten many others like that, from many of you all. So that was the Matheson tour, and there we are on that. And there we started our tour in 1976, and you see we had a number of tours. And at about the same time, I had met Roger Tory Peterson, and I asked him to do a Texas tour, and he had remarried. It was his third wife, and he wanted her to see Texas, and he said, yes, I'll come. And he did the Texas tour, again, from Beaumont all the way down to South Texas. And one memory I have, a kind of funny memory, was after we stayed in a motel in Beaumont, which was okay. It wasn't just great. It wasn't like this hotel. And the next morning, Roger said, oh, it was so wonderful. I heard the mockingbirds singing all night. I left my door open. And I thought, mosquitoes? People that might want to rob you, and you had your door open? Well, that was Roger with his enthusiasm. And he loved the tour. We had fallouts, and we saw two things on that tour I've never seen before. A group of about 20 bobolinks all singing together on the Texas coast, a group singing of bobolinks. I've seen them do their flight displays, but these were migrating. And then toward the end of the tour, a group singing of lark buntings up further north. And just a wonderful trip with him. And I'm very envious now when I think of what he was like at my age, because we hadn't seen a verdin, and we stop and there's traffic and everything. Oh, there's a verdin singing over there. And he's like 70 years old, he can hear a verdin, and he had an amazing ear. But that trip was very successful, and it was very important because this new company that I had started at, we were barely able to pay our bills. We were not doing, we didn't have much money coming in. Once we announced the trip with Roger, it filled up, and we had some money coming in, some cash. And on the trip, I asked him if he would go on our letterhead and be one of our associates. And I said, if you do, we will pay you $1,000 a year for doing that. He said, Victor, you can't afford that. You start a new company, I will do it just to help you. It was very nice. And he became like a second father. We were very, very close. Anyway, so we started, there we are with John Rowlett and other people on our Mexico trip. After the Texas trip, I went to have dinner with him and his wife in New London. And I said, would you do a Mexico trip? And I could see the wheels turning in his brain. I've got so much to do, just like all of us. And then he said, yes, I'll do the Mexico trip. And that was a great success. And he did a few other trips with us and was a great boost to our company. And then I moved to Austin. There is our letterhead in those days and the sketch that had been done. And let me mention, by the way, because you all might think, why is it called Victor Emanuel Nature Tours? Is it because he has a big ego and he wants his name on it? No, I didn't have any idea what to call the company. Well, there was an advertising firm in Dallas who had done the little pamphlets we did when we were trying to elect a better school board in Houston, which we did. And they had done the art, the pamphlets. And I thought, well, I'll get them to do a pamphlet. And they said, call it Victor Emanuel Nature Tours because you've had these articles about you in national magazines and it will help you get it started. So that's why it got named that. But what I'm very pleased with is I made it Nature Tours because that expressed the philosophy of my mentors. Butterflies, flowers, trees, clouds, nature all around us, beauty all around us. So I'm really glad that I picked that name. So there we are, starting Nature Tours. There are some of our first tours that we were doing, and we were doing in different areas. And at that time, one of the people that had joined me that was a tremendous help was David Wolf. And here he is with his wife. And I love this. There it is. Mimi and David gave birth to Matthew Wade Wolf on February 17th. And so he was late to join the Western Mexico tour because Matthew came late. But anyway, I thought that was a nice memory. And then David and Mimi led a tour to Big Bend, as I remember, with just one person on it. And they saw this bird they had never seen. And there's a picture that was made of it, the Aztec thrush, a new bird for the United States, an Aztec thrush. And there they are with David and Mimi, and there's the Aztec thrush. And then we had other people join us. We had Ted Parker, one of the greatest birders and naturalists in the world, right here with Bob Ridgely, who became a close friend of mine, has done amazing work in conservation. And Ted Parker led a lot of our tours. And a little side story, we were on a Peru tour and he was rooming with his girlfriend. And when we divided the group and half would go with Ted and half with me, I knew I was in trouble because people would see many more birds with Ted because he was the great expert. He knew every bird call. So he comes back from the hike and he's going to go in his girlfriend's room and he just turns to me and says, Victor, we saw a bird that's never been seen before, and just closes the door. I thought, what? So I knock on the door and he had seen this little toady flycatcher here, the white cheek. Its name might have been changed now. Kevin can help me with that. But it was then called the white cheek toady flycatcher. It was only known from one netted bird about 20 or 30 years earlier, and he rediscovered it. And somewhat the philosophy of our company is expressed in this article that was in our newsletter, and our newsletter was so important. We are especially attentive to bird song and bird behavior, knowing that a few moments listening to avian music or watching an interesting behavioral display can be a rich natural history experience. Our tours offer an opportunity for us to share with you our techniques of bird finding, bird identification, as well as the aesthetic appreciation for one of nature's most remarkable evolutionary achievements, the living bird. A migrant fallout on the Texas coast, a swarm of army ants with its attendant tropical bird party, a tree full of toucans displaying in the dying light. These natural dramas are impossible to guarantee. On the other hand, a successful nature tour is to a remarkable degree predictable. Let us show you this year. And I think you've been shown that in this meeting. And so then in 1980, we were doing 28 tours. And by 1981, we were doing 46 tours. So we were growing fairly rapidly. And then this is similar. And then as we were doing tours, I want to show you this picture here, shows you what the early days were like. There's a nice plane flight. There's a lovely private flight on a plane. It's not private. It's the only flights within Ecuador that were available. They didn't have any internal flights. They didn't have any aircraft, but the governor of Ohio wanted to get a new plane. So he sold his plane at a great bargain to the people in Ecuador. You can have my plane for a small amount of money. And that gave them a way to have internal flights. So we're on the governor's plane flying from Quito to Napo to do a tour. And there we are with plenty of leg room, our equipment right around us. And it's amazing to me that we did this to people, that we took people on a flight, but there was no other way to go. We did this. It's just a funny memory. And then to go from that to the Sea Cloud, from that plane to the most beautiful ship in the world, which there were a couple from North Carolina that were on a tour with me, and they told me about the Sea Cloud. They had been on a Sea Cloud trip. And I thought maybe someday we can just reserve a few cabins on the Sea Cloud, take a few people on the Sea Cloud. And then we were able, as our company, to charter the entire boat. We've done it maybe 15 times, the Lesser Antilles, Spain, Portugal, different places we've gone, Sicily, Malta. And it is a life experience. Those of you who have done it, I guarantee you, the most beautiful boat in the world. So we have it again this spring with Portugal and Spain. So that shows the growth of the company from the wonderful fancy plane in Ecuador to this wonderful boat. And there we are. And then I'm just going to mention a few places and honorable people and notable people and honorable. One of the things about birding, and it's true of all of you, you meet people through birding that you wouldn't have met. And here I am with Alvarez del Toro, the first great conservationist in Mexico. And here I am, he was head of the zoo, he was head of the whole museum, and he got the Getty Award, which I think is $800,000 from President H.W. Bush. And he did all this, and I got to know him. And here we are. We're at the King Ranch with Peter English, another one of the young people that I got to be close friends with, me and Leonard Stiles. Now, all of you have been on the Kennett Ranch. Well, Leonard Stiles was hired by Mr. Bob Clayburgh as a cowboy, and he was in charge of a whole fourth of the ranch, of all the other cowboys and the cattle rustling, and he had retired. And the King Ranch wanted us to do birding tours and approached me. They brought Leonard out of retirement because he knew every road, every turn on every road, because there were hundreds of roads. And Leonard and I became very close friends. I actually drove down to his funeral service when he died, which is right after 9/11. I drove down and knew him and his wife and his kids. And he's a remarkable man. And I could tell you a lot of stories about Leonard, but I'll tell you one wonderful short story. He became friends with Mr. Oppenheimer from New York. They met somewhere. No, he didn't, but Mr. Bob did, the owner of the ranch. And Mr. Oppenheimer had him come to South Carolina to visit him. And he drove around. He said, yeah, we got about 20 head over here. And we got 50 head here. We got about 100 head here. And Mr. Bob said when they got back to the ranch, Mr. Oppenheimer, I don't think you have as many cattle as you think you do. That's how a cattleman could just, turned out rustlers were taking his cattle. So no one in the sheriff's department in South Carolina could help him. And he called Mr. Bob and said, I need help. He said, we will send Leonard. Leonard had worked for the Texas Cattlemen's Association. He came out, I won't go the whole story, but he found the rustlers and stopped the rustling. But anyway, I got to know these King Ranch people. And here we have, I went after with the Bateman, Robert Bateman, with my friend Keena Ferguson's husband at the time, first husband, and that's where their little baby James. And there is me and Keena Ferguson, who became one of my dear friends, and Keena Alexander Formason, and did great conservation work. And Rose Styron, who I met through Peter and George, and Birgit Bateman on the King Ranch. And I had driven to the King Ranch as a kid. 16 was my first trip to the King Ranch, but just driving through it on that Highway 77 you were on. And I looked at it longingly and thought, gosh, I'd love to go on that ranch. I'd love to go birding. I knew in Texas, you don't go cross a fence without permission. And I never dreamed that I would get to know the King Ranch founders, get to bird the King Ranch. And it was a wonderful experience. And then with Peter Massett, here I am in Antarctica, get to go with Peter. That was Roger Tory Peterson's favorite area. And to go with Birgit and her husband, Bob wasn't in the photo, was there. To both sides, we went from Tierra del Fuego, and we also went from Tasmania to the Ross Sea. And other great friends, there's Sam Johnson of Johnson's, who was a great supporter of Cornell, and my friends, Linda Fleming with her husband, Bob, and me, and we all became very good friends. And Bob and I led our first India tour I went on, and I fell in love with India. Bob had grown up there because his parents, his father was a missionary, Presbyterian missionary, Methodist missionary, I think, and his mother set up hospitals. And they set up the first hospital in Nepal. They set up hospitals all over India. And a book was written about his parents that they loved the book, everything except the title, The Amazing Flemings of Kathmandu. They didn't like being called the Amazing Flemings, but they were amazing. And their son, Bob, we did many trips to India, and I could tell you story after story, a wonderful story. And one quick one was we went to a remote area where we had to cross the river, a road to come out, but there was a stream crossing the road, and there was a lot of rain. And Bob said, with all this rain, we may not be able to drive our Jeeps across the river. Don't worry, they have elephants. So the next day, we couldn't get across the stream. And here came an elephant up the stream with a driver, a mahout, and to take us across and maybe pull our cars across. And as soon as the elephant got nearby, it just turned around and ran away. It didn't like the idea of taking these gringos. So Bob said, don't worry, they'll get another elephant. And another elephant came that was very gentle and pulled the car across the river, and we got out of that park. But anyway, just one of the many wonderful, amazing experiences I had through birding. And then I met Raj Singh through Bob, who is one of the top birders and naturalists and conservationists in India. And we were having dinner in Austin at a Mexican restaurant, and Rod said to me, Victor, you've done these cruises. Have you ever thought of doing a train trip in India? I could arrange for you to charter the Palace on Wheels, our top train, and take it where it's never gone again. Not just around Delhi in the north, but go south to the best tiger reserve. And to make a long story short, we filled up the train and we had a party, and every man got a scar, a med for us, them. Everyone got that on their head. And there's Peter Matheson in there and other people on the train trip. And it was at a private home where they give parties outdoors at their home. And another quick little story, we had arranged to be at the palace of the prince of that province. And Raj Kenming said that the princess of Thailand is coming, so we've been kicked out of the palace. We can't go to the palace. But don't worry, I've arranged a party at this other house. And when Raj said, don't worry, you don't worry. So we went to the other house and we had this amazing party. So the next time we did the train trip, he said, do you want to go to the palace? Or do you want to go back to the place we went? I said, let's go to the other place. He got dancers and music at the top in India. Anyway, and then another person I got to know that's a dear friend is Lars Johnson. He's the greatest living bird artist. When the Prince of Sweden turned 60, the present from the people of Sweden to Lars was a painting of a European avocet. And there's a picture of a peregrine falcon chasing some ducks that's in the museum and the Wildlife Museum in Wyoming. And he became a dear friend, and he did a workshop, an art workshop for us one time at Bolivar, and came on our Antarctica tour. And the only problem of having him the Antarctica tour every day, he's doing sketches and paintings, that all of which I wanted to buy, and I couldn't afford any of them. But anyway, I also got to know James Schlesinger because my dear friend Lynn Coleman was his legal team. Lynn was his legal team, and he found out James was a birder, and he told him he knew me. And so he came to Texas, and there were 5 birds he wanted to see. And there I've got a nice hat on to keep from getting sunburned. So there we are looking, and he did see the Fruitus pygmy. And then I bought a house at the Bolivar Flats. We read about a lot in our newsletter, just a small little house, and where I was there this spring, and Ben and his wife, Jessica, were down there with me, and we had 15 kinds of warblers next to my house, 10 feet away, and I was in heaven. Warbler after beautiful warbler. It was an amazing hour. And in the place that I went to, people asked me my favorite place, El Triunfo. It's a mountain range. It's a valley between mountains in southern Chiapas. It's a hike up a mountain to get there, or you can ride a horse. And we have one of our participants here, who I hope she'll raise her hand, who went, even though she was the age I thought, she's not going to raise her hand, who went on our El Triunfo trip. Someone over here. Someone here that's here. I'm not seeing her. But anyway, she went on our trip. We had people go on our trip that were along in years. But there's the Horn Guan there. And then Robert Bateman, I talked to him about it over and over, and he finally went with Birgit. At the end of the trip, we're having dinner in the restaurant where we're going to fly home. He said, Victor, you were right. This is the king of tours, but it's not for everybody. And here we are with people at El Triunfo, and Ken Kaufman came. He said it was the place he most wanted to go, and there are the mountains behind us. So I just wanted to share that with you about favorite people and favorite places. And then here are the Spoffords. Sally was one of the first employees of the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology. And there she is with her husband, Mr. Spofford, and Roger Peterson, an old friend of theirs. And they had these fabulous hummingbird feeders, and our campers could go over there. And then Mr. Spofford died, and then his wife died, and she left her property to her daughter, who sold it to a man who took down all the hummingbird feeders and the bird feeders and put in statues. Everything was gone. So because of that happened, it led me to do something in the midst of everything else I was doing that I think is a wonderful story, because the Spoffords died. The Battens died, who had hummingbird feeders and let people come in and look at the hummingbirds, just they welcomed birders, but they died. And their daughter needed to sell their property so that the family could each get their share of the inheritance. So she wrote me a letter. Well, I have to admit, it got buried on my desk. I'm not really, I got lots of stuff on my desk. And then I got a phone call, and I'll try to imitate her voice. Victor, this is Julie Smith. You need to help the Patons. She was 103. This is a 103-year-old woman who used to travel with us into her certainly 80s, if not 90s, who was a friend of the Patons. You don't turn down a 103-year-old woman who's asking you to help. So I got involved, and I was on the board of the American Bird Conservancy, and I didn't usually go to meetings because I was too busy traveling and doing other things. Just a second. I don't know if this is going to work. Is this working? Yeah. Traveling. But I went to the board meeting, and I told them that I wanted them to get involved in raising the $350,000 we had to raise to save the Paton. And no one on the board supported it. They said, this is not our mission. We're supposed to save habitat for rare birds. This is not I said, but if you save it and your name is right there at the entrance with a big poster, someone who comes, because there were 1,000 people a year that came there, might support your organization. No, we're not interested. But the man sitting next to me, who I'd never met, a new board member, said, I'll give 20. I knew he didn't mean $20. It was 20,000. But after the meeting, I was very discouraged. George Fenwick, who was the director, he was the CEO. He said to me, George Fenwick, there's a picture of him with the head of Travis Audubon. He said, I've decided as the executive director, I don't need the board's permission to do this. We're going to do it. So we're going to save the Patons. And because it's the only place in the United States you can see a violet-crowned hummingbird reliably, this gorgeous hummingbird. So, but he said, we're only going to save it if there's the Patons later, but you're only going to save it if we can then have an organization that will run it. We don't want the American Bird Conservancy to be running the Patons. So the head of Tucson Audubon agreed that they would take it over. We would give it to Tucson Audubon, which sounds like a nice gift. But the board members were really worried. What about upkeep? What about staffing? What about bills? We need some money. In addition to being given it, we need some money to run it. So they said we need, say, $50,000. So we raised another $50,000, and they said, no, that's not enough. We need $100,000. And my friend George Fenwick finally said, this is the end of it. We're not raising any more money. We're getting out. We're sending all the money back. We're getting out of it. So it's interesting about the chances in life. So the head of Audubon was driving to the office to tell George Fenwick it's all over, and his cell phone rings. And it's this woman whose husband is the top ornithologist who Ted Parker studied with at the University of Arizona. He said, how's it going? Well, it's not going well at all. We have to raise this. He said, call this lady and she will help you. So the head of Audubon called her and he said, whatever you need, my husband and I will do it. Because they love the Patons, they love their property. He was a very successful lawyer in Tucson, and they love to get away from his legal work in Tucson and go hang out with the Patons. So it all happened. We brought it together, and we have the Paton Hummingbird Center, and there it is. Thanks to that. And I don't have it in the slide, but there's a big poster there about the American Bird Conservancy and about them. So we both got great publicity there, but that's not why we didn't do it. And they've improved it a lot with more hummingbird feeders and a little prairie and things. And so that was something I was very proud of, and I have to watch my time here. The other thing was right about 1985, some of the folks that I'd worked with decided to leave and start their own organization. And it was very painful when you have a company and some people leave and what's going to happen and are we going to survive? And it was a tough time for me. And fortunately, right at that time, they were young men, Kevin Zimmer and his brother Barry Zimmer, who's over here somewhere. Barry Zimmer. Please stand up. Kevin Zimmer and Barry Zimmer. And here's Barry Zimmer. They had joined us. They had joined the company. And so we had them, plus we had all the other people that stayed with us, like David Wolf, and they were all approached by this new company, but they turned them down. I forget calling David Wolf, wondering, because he was good friends with these people, was he going to go? And he said, no, Victor, I'm sticking with you. And that was a huge emotional help for me. But just to show you what Kevin did, the people that left said, and this is not surprising, they said, we're leaving, but we're willing to run all the tours that we're scheduled to run in the coming year. But you're leaving the company, but you want to run, because they wanted to be paid. And my advisor, Harry Gerhardt, who helped start Texas Monday, said, Victor, you can't do that. And so we had a tour that was the Manu, the island off of near Maine, that went there and up to Bonaventure Island, that they were going to do, one of these people leaving. And I talked to Kevin about, Kevin said, I'll go up there, scout Martha's Manu, Grand Manan, and go up to Bonaventure and scout that and do the tour. So he did that and had to come back and right away leave the tour. Thank you, Kevin. And it was a great success. So that's the kind of, the people we had that helped us get through that. And then the summer camps. When I moved to Austin in 1978, on a hawk watch, I became friends with, and from left to right, the young people. There's David Sugano, there's Peter English, and then on the far right is Kurt Huffman. And in front of them is this remarkable one named Sally Spofford, who had bought some land down there, and we got to stay on her property. So they went to Mexico with me, and we had a great time, and they became close friends, almost like part of my family. And I thought it'd be so wonderful to have a camp for kids, so they would have what I didn't have, meet other young people that share their experience. And so I started the camp in Arizona, Camp Chiricahua. And these young men, a couple of them helped in the camp as counselors. And the camp was a great success. I may have another picture there. There's the camp. There are campers there. There's a group of people at the camp. And Michael O'Brien and Louisa Midas have run the camps. And so have Barry and I and other people I'm forgetting. And there we are at Patagonia. And there we are, another picture at the camp. And some of the kids there. And then we had a reunion. One reunion we've had of people that have been to the camps, and we came down to South Texas over the Christmas holidays to do birding together and camp. And that's the only reunion we have. But in that reunion picture, there's Ken Kaufman that did it with me, and there's in the back there, we'll identify all the other people. There's Brian Gibbons in the far right. And we have from the camps, at the time when things were kind of rough, a friend of mine said, yes, you have all this competition, but you're the only birding organization that has a farm team. And our farm team was the camps. And from the camps, we have Barry Lyon. We have, coming out of the camps, we have Willie Hutchison that just joined us, and we have Brian Gibbons. And there were others that came for a while. So thank you, guys. And so the camps were a great emotional boost to me, because this was something new to do after these other people had left and formed a competing company. And this was something new, not in competition with anyone else, but doing something out of my heart and that I believed in. And still, and we've done now camps since 1986. So we've had about 500 campers go through it. And we do give scholarships. And I know some of you have given me some checks in response to getting my book. Anyone else that wants to ever give us scholarship funds, you can send it to us. We give scholarships. We met this young man last night who's going to come. There's a young woman that's going to come that Michael and Louise have met. And we do camps in southern Arizona, in the Chiricahuas, and down along the border, and also Camp Cascades in Washington State. And these camps, by the way, are not only nonprofit, they're money losing for us because our staff sets them up, and the staff are being paid to set up tours where we might make some money. They're setting up camps where we're trying to break even, but they have 14 campers and 2 camp leaders, and sometimes a counselor in addition to that. Financially, it's not like a big camp where people are bringing in lots of money, but I'm very proud of it. It's one of the best things I've ever done. And then I want to conclude here. There's some other things I want to tell you about with what I call the living company. And that is that early on, I wanted to talk about our founding principles. And it started at the beginning. And the founding principles were to do something that no nature organization or travel company of any time had ever done. Create an organization where, as my dear friend Garrett Boone said, you hire good people and you treat them well. We treat them very well. And that they are members of our team, of our community, and that we did create tour leading as a career. Most companies tour leading, if you're on a cruise ship and you made a tour leader, they are contract labor. They'll do this cruise and they have several months off. They may do another cruise. They try to piece together a life and a living. Our leaders, we have designed it in terms of the way we run the company, that they have a career. And what we've done, that I'm very proud of, that no travel organization has done, a 401k plan. And this was thanks to Steve Hilty. He had worked in finance and he said, you need to have a 401k plan with a 4% match. So they have savings because they're going to get old. They're going to get old and they're not going to live on Social Security. So they're going to come and they have a 401k. They have health insurance. This was long before we had Obamacare or anything. Health insurance, where we pay, I think, about 80% of the cost and they pay about 20%. And then we have a deductible that we have to get a better rate on our health insurance, but we set the amount they have to pay it $3,000 above that we pay it. Because again, what that would take out of them, they have to pay the entire deductible. So health insurance is very important because people have health problems. So retirement, 401k, health insurance was a big thing. Medical savings plan that they can contribute to and we contribute to. So that's tax-free money. And then if you have to go to the doctor, use that money to see the doctor because the health insurance doesn't cover that. So we do all of that. And I'm probably forgetting some other things, but basically a video that was done about me by the Travis Audubon Society, where I expressed some of my philosophy. Here we go. I've come up with a new idea, and that is if you can't remember having seen a bird, it's a new bird for you. So the older you get, the easier it is to get new birds. What's on top of the mesquite? I'm Victor Emanuel. I was born in Houston, Texas. And one thing, guys, I didn't get to mention about scope procedure. Look, to the right, a flock of birds are coming in. I got interested in birds when I was 8 years old, and it's changed my life. When I was in the Cub Scouts, one of the boys said, you should join the Outdoor Nature Club. You should go to their meetings because I can tell you're interested in nature and birds. So I went, and there I met my mentors, Frank Watson, Armand Iramatki, and Joe Heiser. And there I understood how important mentoring is. Those men gave me two great gifts. One, to appreciate every bird and animal that I saw, even if I'd seen it before. To savor it, to look at all the marks on it, all the detail, and to be interested in conservation. So they gave me that. Those were the gifts my mentors imparted to me. We've got some young birders in front of us who are scouting.
I've known Victor my whole life, and he's got me into birding.
Interesting.
He's a big reason why I like the outdoors.
Yeah, here's the summer tanager here. Wonderful.
He's an amazing person. I love him.
Early, I was interested in being a biologist, and then I decided my interest in birds was more just looking at them and enjoying them, not studying them in the detailed way a biologist does. And then I got involved in running bird tours. I saw that that was a way that I could have more time out in nature. I look at these catalogs, and it just gives me a sense of I could start a company and offer in Texas, Arizona, and Mexico, where I and some of my friends knew those areas. And very soon we expanded to Panama, Peru, now 150 tours all over the world.
Victor, there is an oriole visible here. My name is Barry Lyon. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Victor Emanuel Nature Tours.
There's the oriole on top.
In 1986, Victor started a program of summertime youth camps for young people that were interested in birds and natural history. Until that time, nothing like that had ever been done before. Early in 1987, I went when I was 15 years old. Attending the youth birding camp was a transformative experience in my life. Ultimately, Victor offered me a job when I was about 8 months out of college, and I've been with him in this company ever since. I love birds and nature. I enjoy guiding very much, but I didn't necessarily land in this line of work because this is what I had to do with my life. I chose it because of the examples that Victor said. A lot of activity coming in.
Immortality is not having a monument named after you, which eventually is going to fall down. It's to offer good values and change the life of a person that then may change the life of another person that's younger, and then another person that's younger, and then another person that's younger, and that can go on for hundreds and hundreds of years. That's immortality.
And there are two things I want to say about myself and my life that may be submissive. I am not one of the world's top birders. I'm not even one of the world's best birders in North America. I had an ear infection at 2 and lost my left eardrum. I don't hear birds very well, and I don't even hear people very well now. But so I'm not one of the world's top birders, and it embarrasses me when I get introduced to people. Here's one of the top birders in the world or the country. I'm not. The other thing is I'm not very wealthy. I didn't set up the company to make money. I set up the company to follow my passion and give good lives to other people who will be members of the company. And what has made this, and this is this quote I like so much from Theodore Cross, who was a photographer. Photographing birds, along with my family and work, have combined to give me, in the words of Erik Erikson, the great psychiatrist, an emotionally successful life in which the inevitable despair that comes with the physical dotation of the body is defeated by a sense of personal wholeness. Regardless of one's career choice, watching, studying, and photographing birds are superb ways of keeping one's mind off one's own mortality and staying very much alive. And that's how I feel. And that's what's helped me get through the pandemic and the worry I had about the pandemic and with that. What's the most important to me in my life are my family, my friends, nature, for me, classical music and reading and poetry. Those are things that make my life rich. And so I wanted to talk about the way beyond. And the way ahead is Barry, our Chief Operating Officer, who does a lot of the work in the company and did a huge amount of work making this event successful. Work, work, work. Thank you, Barry. Without Barry and Greg Lopez, we would not have had the event we had. So the way ahead is me and Barry continue to run the company and do everything we can to make a success, and our staff and leaders. No company in the world has a better staff or better set of leaders. Many companies that offer tours, big cruise companies, there's no mention of their staff. The leaders aren't even mentioned. You know who you're going to have. You know our people, and you saw them this week. They're amazing. They're absolutely amazing. And here we are at a company reunion with our office staff and our leaders. And of course, the most important thing right here is all of you. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for all you've done. I think that's it. Yeah. Okay.
Everybody, a toast to Victor Emanuel.
I love you all, folks. I love you all.
Thank you much, everybody. Thank you for coming.